Okay, everybody, welcome back to the Orbis Sentry podcast. We're going to continue where we left off last time, and I hope you are finding this conversation enlightening and informative, and that you will find it helpful in your walk with Christ as we move forward with discussing the things that are having such a dramatic impact on all of us in the world around us. So we will now proceed. Well, okay, let's move on to the next event. The next one would probably be the Dayton Dialogue.
Oh, Paganicon.
Oh, no, Paganicon. Okay, so before we do Paganicon, I want to just briefly mention the Munich Security Conference at the beginning of this year, because I signed up for it. I wasn't able to attend all the seminars, but I attended several of the seminars online. And for the first time, after having gone to the Eclipse event and then Burning Man and multiple conversations with you and studying the space and reading your book and studying what I already study in international security, something started to stand out to me at the Munich Security Conference, which I had not noticed before. And it was, okay, if we think about what kind of you've codified in some sense, put words to, put definition to in your book, in Game of Gods in the Age of Re-enchantment, just taking that term re-enchantment, and there's kind of a whole language and kind of an ethos surrounding that. And for the first time, I noticed that embedded within the participants at the Munich Security Conference, which I had not seen before. I mean, it was there, I just didn't know how to look for it. And then I saw it, and in particular, the way it stood out was after J.D. Vance made his speech about how Europe is stifling free speech and all these things, and that's Vice President J.D. Vance, and then the European leaders stood up and objected to that. Many of them did. And then there were some people that stood up and started talking and saying, we only live on this planet, and we are on planet Earth, and we're one people, we're one race on Earth. And it's the planet this and the planet that and the human race this on this one place. And this is the only place that we have to live. And I realized this is re-enchantment language. And it demonstrates that this is in the minds of our global leaders. This worldview is embedded in the minds of their global leaders. Now, you probably won't see those global leaders at Burning Man wearing funny clothes and going, and publicly taking psychedelics or things like that. Some of them probably do go to Burning Man, but they probably go incognito. So that just kind of really, that opened my mind again to another aspect of how this is significant. It's global, and it really is part of the whole understanding of what the risks are to nations, individuals, to missions, to missionaries going overseas, and all these different things. Because when world leaders are embedded in this belief system, it's going to affect policy. And if it's going to affect policy, it's going to affect international relations, and it's going to affect us. It's going to affect all of us, not just what we do, but all Christians in all the nations. So that was very significant. So.
But you're right. Once you know the language, once you understand that the philosophical foundation of where they're coming from, the religious, spiritual foundation where that's birthed from, then it pops all over the place. I was at a meeting as well, but it was an in-person meeting. This is also before Paganicon.
Oh yes,
and this was back in January of this year, and that was an academic conference on the future of the United Nations. And again, same kind of thing is popping up there. We're doing this to save the planet, doing this to bring the world together. It's up to us. It's up to us. It's always, the focus is always a human focused, nature focused, creation focused experience. We never ever bow our knee to an external God. No, because in essence, we're making that claim that we're the ones who we save humanity. When humanity can come together, we have saved ourselves. It is a salvation message. It really is. And when you see it that way, as a a re-enchanted message, alternative message of salvation, all of a sudden, even the politics of it kind of just starts to drop, starts to fall away, and you see it for what it really is.
Mm-hmm.
It's religion. It is really religion. It is a cult. And that's why I think the terminology that you used earlier, the cult of global empire, is so important.
And that really is, it really does bring definition to the whole system that we're studying. And I think it's really important because for someone who might come and listen to just part of this podcast here and there, they might think that we're somehow endorsing this worldview or something like that,
Right.
and we're not. We are recognizing it for what it is. We are, followers of Christ. But this, we are recognizing what it is. We need to bring definition to it. We need to educate. We need to share that, and then help us to understand, and help the church to understand how to respond.
Right.
Okay.
Again, back to being engaging in cultural diplomacy. Cultural
diplomacy, exactly. Cultural diplomacy. Okay. So now let's the next event that we went to, and this was Paganicon.
Yep.
Now I had a meeting with some of my colleagues in the security world just before this. I had given a presentation on the cycles of history. And we're going to talk about this a little bit later, talking about the large scale models that we use to kind of frame what's happening. And I've posted that on our website. I will make that video public soon. But the going to Paganicon at that time, driving up in the middle of winter the late end of winter it's kind of the end of March. So going to Minneapolis, Minnesota, and describe Paganicon.
Yeah, it's the largest gathering of witches and pagans, indoor conference setting in the U.S. Midwest. This is one of many that happens across North America, mostly though in the U.S. There used to be a much larger one called Paganicon out of San Jose, California. But the U.S. Midwest has a significant number of pagans, like a lot. It's probably the highest concentration of pagans in the Midwest is in the Twin Cities region, which is why the local pagan community calls their territory Paganistan. In other words, it is their homeland. It's their country.
That's right.
And so Paganicon is the conference or the convention of Paganistan.
Yes. Okay, so at Paganicon, now you've gone a number of times. This was my first time to Paganicon. Now, since I'd already gone to the Eclipse event and the Burning Man, I wasn't shocked by what I was seeing there. What were some of maybe just a couple of the highlights that you noticed at Paganicon?
Yeah. Well, it's a reoccurring theme, and this is part of the importance of going continually to these kinds of events. So, I mean, I'll just backtrack real quick. We attend as much as possible, either boots on the ground or virtually, different geopolitical events. That's a part of what we're doing. And we'll talk about that in a few minutes. We're looking at where culture is shifting and changing fast, which is at transformational gatherings like Burning Man or the Eclipse festivals. There's another one happening in 2026. We're trying to keep a pulse on the technological side, including transhumanism. I was one of the early Christian researchers in that field, trying to understand the transhumanist movement. So that we have all these they seem to be differing and very disconnected fields of study, including the economic and the security side. That's all there. That's an area that I have not talked about much, but I've written about both the security and the economic side to some measure, though I've really kind of kept that off to the side. And at some point, we'll be amalgamating that more as we go, no doubt. And so we're looking at all this, and we're seeing that this all seems to be differing, of course, in terms of their topics and subjects. And that's true. But there's always this underlying connection, worldview connection, this sense of re-enchantment that's come in, this sense of of where the world needs to go, what our vision of the future should be, what man's vision of the future should be. So in all of these, when you attend each of these kinds of events multiple times, you see patterns emerge in every one of these areas of, every one of these topical areas. No different with Paganicon and watching the pagan community. So I've been doing this for a while. Here's the theme, because that was the original question. What did you see? This is the pattern that I've been seeing, and that is the search for authenticity in the pagan community. And what do I mean by that?
Okay.
Yeah, what do I mean by that? So in the 1970s, 80s, and 90s, there was a sense that paganism is a pre-Christian religion. It is old. It has deep roots. It is grounded in an authentic religious tradition, religious experiences. Though we can't really know what the old witches were like or the old pagans were like, there was this, and I'm just saying this broadly, there was this general sense that we come from this known lineage, this known tradition. By the later 1990s, early 2000s, that's already coming into question. Because reality is the modern pagan movement is a new movement. It's really a new religious movement that doesn't really have, it doesn't have the rich, deep roots that it claims it does. There are roots, absolutely. Philosophically, it's religious roots, but not necessarily a lineage of traditions. So much of this is being reconstructed. And so I've been watching this internal debate, internal wrestling over where do we, as pagans, find our authenticity. Well, by the time I was going to pagan events, that was the big question. Where does our authenticity come from? Because we don't have a sense of history the way, let's say, Hinduism does, Judaism does, Islam does, or Christianity does. There isn't that within the pagan world. That is all lost in time. All there is snippets that can be pulled from, little angles and little perspectives. That's it. So fascinating when you realize that they themselves are wrestling with where is their authenticity coming from. And so the shift has been, okay, we don't have, and I saw this the last couple of Paganicons I've been to, and probably Pantheacon in 2020 when I was there in February of 2020. We don't have an authentic lineage that is traceable in literature, traceable in institutions. We don't have that. We're cobbling things together, we're reconstructing, and it's like, here's the package. This is us. This is the old ways. But we don't actually know what the old ways are.
All right.
Yeah. We all we can do is pull from history. And in fact, here's an interesting fact. If you want to know what some of the ancient pagan practices and beliefs were, go to the Old Testament. Especially, obviously on the Mediterranean side, but go to the Old Testament. All of a sudden we have a sense of what they were like. So the shift has been away from that to being this. And this kind of fits with the age we're in. While we don't have a traceable, authentic lineage the way other traditions, religious traditions do, our authenticity comes by what you've experienced. It's what you feel that gives authenticity. And I'm like, oh, there is the trend of re-enchantment.
That's right. Yeah.
And if we're really honest about ourselves as Christians, we're doing the same thing.
Yeah, we definitely tend to do the same thing. And in fact, and I was just listening to a particular preacher that I really found who in particular, he was talking about how there's such a strong tendency to, and they even have schools for worship leaders to try and get people into the feeling of worshiping God through the music, the ecstatic sensation that the music can bring about. And he was criticizing that, rightfully so, I think, because our faith is not based on feelings, it's based on truth. The holy affections are important.
Right.
God commands us to have the holy affections, but they are not what define our faith. And
Right.
so it's very interesting that you say that. And that whole idea that that goes back to the epistemology, which in later podcasts we're going to talk about epistemology and where epistemology comes from. There's that big word, epistemology. I always kind of joke about, you should try going to the grocery store and ask the lady who's checking out your groceries, hey, what's your epistemology? And be like, what? That's epistemology, is the study of knowledge. And in particular, what we're talking about is the basis on what causes us to believe something, what makes us believe something is true. And there's empirical epistemology. Empiricism is based on scientific observations and all these things. And that's the naturalistic way of viewing things. There's God's revelation, which is that we believe that God has shown us what is true. That is a revelation-based epistemology. And within that part of revelation is the natural world, and the other part of revelation is scripture. So scripture is the natural world is a subset of God's revelation, but it doesn't supersede the scripture. Then you have what seems to be where everything is going in the age of re-enchantment, which is an experience-based epistemology. Because how can you argue with experience? And ultimately, I think the way it's being framed is actually empirical, because experience at some level is something that you see, you observe, you take into account. And so when someone goes and trips out on ayahuasca and they meet luminous beings in some higher dimension that instruct them on something like some ancient language or whatever it is, some of these things that we've heard people talk about at Burning Man, they believe that that's scientific.
Right.
Because they anchor it to this concrete, in their minds, a concrete experience that they have. And so, very interesting that is so much a part of it. And of course, we saw how, the different people that we talked to at Paganicon and some of their experiences, and so many have unfortunately come out of Christianity in order to join the pagan religion. And I think another thing that stood out to me at Paganicon, besides the fact that we're there, it's a little bit different from something like Burning Man or the Eclipse event for me, because I recognize that at Paganicon, we're actually in kind of their house of worship to some degree. And so we have to be a lot more respectful. Not that we're never disrespectful, but like at Burning Man, it's free and open ideas. We can talk to anybody, and all ideas are free. But just as we wouldn't appreciate a whole group of pagans descending on one of our churches and cornering people in a lobby and trying to tell us why we should believe in paganism, why people because that's our house of worship, they don't appreciate it if we go there and the whole thing that we're doing is to try and get them to come out of their belief system into Christianity. And at the same time, there's this tension that we feel. There's this tension that we feel about that, because we believe in Christ. We believe he is the way of love, the way of life, the way of righteousness and goodness, and the way of peace. So we do still want them to come to know Christ, but we don't want to be make them feel like we're in their face,
right.
dogging them,
Right. So it becomes very conversational. That's what ends up going, because we all have conversations there. As people ask us what our beliefs are, and as we also ask questions of them. And you're right, though. It's we have to take and we need to do this wherever we go. We take a respectful position. We're not there to bully our way.
Exactly.
We are there to win them over, but not in a way that is bullying. And more often than not, that means we keep our mouths shut. There's a lot of times where people will be going, well, you should have said something. And, I'm realizing more often than not, by not saying anything, at least in a public sense, but then having that opportunity later on, one-on-one with somebody, where all of a sudden, because you hear it in the hallway, all of a sudden somebody says, well, I was at that workshop, and you can go alongside them and go, well, what did you think? And you end up having a conversation, and all of a sudden you're, on that question that is now rattling in everybody's minds, that was brought up by the lecturer, and you can end up having a conversation that swings it back to Christ, but do it in a way that is loving and disarming, graceful yet truthful. Yeah. That's a really hard thing for us to juggle, because the expectation, and the Christian world has this expectation. The expectation is that we now have to resort to harsh rhetoric, because that's what we see online. We've now been trained online by our social media.
That's right.
Social media awards or rewards that type of action, because it creates more visibility for those posts, more responses, more engagement. Right. That's what feeds the algorithms. That's what feeds the system. And so now we're also trained to do the same thing in our real life. We're all now more hot-headed, more antagonistic, ready to jump down each other's throats. But the approach we have to take is, hold on, we can't engage in that level of reaction.
Yes.
What we have to do is respond. And that sometimes means we are quiet, where we know we need to speak, we want to speak, and we want to speak with authority and with love and with grace. And this is the big one. And this is why we go to so many of these events, with understanding.
Yes, that's right.
Huge. And now you can actually have a conversation, and the very fact that they know that you've been through it before, or that you have been, you might be a completely different event, but they all of a sudden find out, oh, you've gone to Paganicon, or you've gone to Burning Man, or you've gone to these other things. There's a level of, well, first of all, it takes them aback. It kind of shocks them a bit. And then there is a level of respect, because, oh, you now understand where they're coming from.
Yeah. I think that understanding and just a sense of love, and I think, Christ has put his compassion in us. And I remember at Paganicon, there was this one thing that we were in. I don't want to give too many details, but I heard a lady cry out in pain over something that she had gone through, an event that she had gone through with another person. And I could tell she was in pain. And it was that pain that drove her into this belief system, where she's seeking answers in this belief system. And I felt the Lord's compassion for her at that moment. I didn't get a chance to talk to her then. I did have some other opportunities to talk to her at other times. And I realized these people need to know that we love them with the love with the love of Christ. And so, and I think if love and understanding are compelling us, Paul said, the love of Christ compels me. The love of Christ compels us. So I think that that's a big part of what drives us in our personal interactions. I think that's where we need to go.
Yep. So, yeah, I agree. And I think it's a model that we're actually, in a way, this is kind of weird, because, and I know you're wrestling with this as well, and I've wrestled with this, because we're not doing traditional missions.
That's right.
This is not traditional, and nor is this necessarily a foreign field, but it is completely foreign in the sense that it is a worldview, a belief system, a belief structure. And now, sure, it's not necessarily in the case for yourself going in the Philippines into the jungle setting. All that is, and correct me if I'm wrong at this, George, all that is location and topography. Of course, other cultural elements like language and, right, social structures all come into play. But at the bottom line, it's just topography. And all we're doing now is seeing that, we have the same the same system, or the same, probably not system, but the same setup in North America, where we have whole cultures of people who are as lost as any other unreached people group that there is.
That's right.
The location is different, but the problem, or the problem and the solution are still the same.
I would say probably like 20 years ago, there would have been a caveat to that, which would have been that the people in the foreign field are isolated linguistically and culturally and geographically.
Yep.
But over the last 20 years, those boundaries, they've been erased to a large degree in so many areas. I mean, and we even noticed during our time when we were there in the tribe, there was one fellow who lived way up in the jungle, up in the mountains, about a 6 to 8 hour walk from where we were. And about every 2 weeks, he'd come down, he'd bring some jungle products he had gotten, and he'd sell them downriver, and then he'd stop by my house and he'd buy batteries, because he had a handheld radio in his house, and he'd buy batteries, and he'd stop by my house and would sit there and have a conversation. He was one of the few people that could speak Tagalog, I think because he had lived out in town at some point when he was a young man before he went back to live in the jungle. And he would then use those batteries. His batteries would last about 10 days or so before they'd run out. And he would listen to Filipino radio. He'd listen to, and he even picked up a little bit of English, but he didn't understand the English, but he did understand the Tagalog. And so he'd come by, and in particular, he would ask me about current events that were happening in the Philippines and in the world around us. And when I look at it now, that was before smartphones. Now, all the people in that area, they all have smartphones. They all, and they have cell phone signal, and they pick up, and they have Facebook, because Facebook granted free access years ago to Filipinos. And so they pick up news through Facebook and all kinds of things. This technology has done two things. It's leveled out the access. In fact, and this is kind of a whole principle of this re-enchantment idea, is using technology to get the message out. So they've leveled out the access to the wider world for people all over. And in so doing, they're promoting through social media the ideas of global citizenship and being a global citizen first and all those kind of things. But it's done that, but it's also had the effect of erasing some of the technical boundaries, so that those people, the argument that we used to use in missions was that people in America have access to Christianity through radio, through the internet, through all kinds of things, but the people overseas, they don't have that. Well, now they do. And that doesn't mean that we don't go. We still need to go and help them to understand it and to make it clear. And it's because they have access to everything, and they don't have a grid for interpreting everything. So, but they do have, they are more accessible now. And so this world, these people that are in our country and that are in Western countries, or even that are in other countries, China and Russia and the global South, that come to places like Burning Man, they are coming because of the worldview that they're getting through technology. And it's that same technology is available to the people in the jungles of the Philippines, or even in places in certain areas of Papua New Guinea or the Amazon, places like that. So
yeah, so the world has shrunk.
It has, very much.
It's shrunk, and then our concept of missions is going to be shifting because the world is shifting so fast. And and this has been an internal struggle. And I know this is, even with Orbis Sentry, this is going to be a struggle. It always is. There's always a struggle, because the church is typically 20 years behind where culture is landing.
That's right.
And it's not that we are to become the culture. Nevertheless, we need to know the culture so that we can begin to speak into it with wisdom, and to be able to walk into it and through it without necessarily being affected by it, and yet being able to act as diplomats, as ambassadors in it. And so I know the church is going to have to wrestle with what does missions look like, both overseas and at home, because now the boundary between the two is blurred in a serious way.
That's right.
That really struck
Yep.
me in 2023. I was at the Parliament of World Religions. I ended up having a conversation with a lady. She was a pagan. This was I met her at the Cosmic Mass. It was a bizarre situation, and I'll explain it more at some other time when we continue on with our podcast. But it was clear in my conversation with her that she did not understand the biblical message at all. Okay. And I ended up giving her the gospel in the space of roughly a minute and a half to 2 minutes, from the fact that our Creator is distinct and unique from creation. That God is absolutely unique. And then very quickly bringing it forward to Jesus Christ and the issue of sin, and how Christ himself, being God, demonstrates his divinity by rising from the dead. And I gave this perspective of what's called one-ism versus two-ism. Dr. Peter Jones from Truth Exchange has done a wonderful job of bringing that model together of one-ism versus two-ism, not dualism, but two-ism. And in the space of just a few minutes, I was able to basically put that on her. And there's reasons. We were supposed to tell each other certain things. And I wasn't a participant. I was actually sitting off to the side. And she came to me during one aspect of the ritual and asked if I could be her partner. And I'm like, oh boy. And then, it wasn't anything that I had to do. We had to say things to each other. And she told me how she viewed me as being divine and blah, 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 all this mumbo jumbo, this new agey, esoteric mumbo jumbo. And I looked at her and said, I will tell you something completely different. And that's what I shared with her then. And when I was done, she looked at me and she goes, okay, let me quickly set the context. She was probably in her 80s. And she's from Delaware. She's an American citizen. And she looked at me and she said, I have never heard this before in my life. Mm-hmm. And all of a sudden it hit me. You are an American. You have been in this country all of your life, because I had some conversations with her afterwards. I found some of the stuff out.
Wow.
You're from Delaware, and you've never heard the gospel.
Wow.
And we have this tendency in the Christian community to go, well, we have Christian radio, we have Christian literature, we have Christian TV. Doesn't mean that they're going to turn that on.
That's right. So we go to where they are.
Bingo.
We go to where they are.
Yep.
Sure.
Just like when you had to go to the Philippines, you went to where they are.
Exactly.
They didn't come to you, George. You went to them.
That's right.
Same principle.
Same principle. Exact same principle.
Yep.
Analogy is in the Old Testament, God told his people, the Jews, stay in the land and the nations will come to you. Stay in the land, be a light, and the nations will come to you. In the New Testament, he shifted it and he said, go into the nations and bring the light to them.
Yeah.
That's what we're supposed to do. Go in, bring the light to them. Go to where they are. So good. Want to thank you all for listening. This is the end of this segment. We're going to pause this our podcast so we can break it up into more manageable chunks so that you can listen and watch. And we'll be back with the next segment very soon.